Hi, everybody. Today we're covering our second to last chapter of the semester. So, chapter 16, sensory, motor, and integrative systems. We're not going to be covering everything from this chapter. So, I will tell you, it's about halfway through the PowerPoint slides, which section we're going to skip in this chapter. So, up first is sensation. So, sensation is the conscious or unconscious awareness of changes in our internal or external environment. When we become conscious of something, that means that we are perceiving it. So that is the concept of perception. Perception is the conscious interpretation of sensations performed mainly by the cerebral cortex. So not all sensations make it all the way to the cerebral cortex. Some of them only go to the spinal cord, like we learned about in reflexes, or to the brainstem, but some do go all the way up into the cerebral cortex, and then we will perceive them. We'll have perception. Each type of sensation is called a sensory modality. So here we have 4: touch, pain, vision, hearing. Sensory modalities are grouped into general senses or special senses. So general, I think of mostly like touch type senses. We have somatic, tactile, which is like touch, thermal, temperature, or proprioceptive, which is involved in movement. And then we have visceral senses: pressure, chemical, stretch, nausea, hunger, and temperature. Special senses are probably what you typically associate with senses: smell, taste, vision, hearing, and equilibrium. So we don't have feeling or touch on that list because it's mostly described by those general senses. Different types of sensory receptors are involved in different senses, and only a single neuron only senses one thing, so they don't share functions. So a hearing neuron is only going to do hearing, or if we go back to the previous general senses, a proprioceptive neuron is only going to do proprioception. It's not going to sense temperature. Okay. Three nerve endings are used to detect pain, temperature, tickle, itch, and some touch. The nerve endings sometimes might be a little bit different. They don't always look like this. This is an example of free nerve endings, which is one type. And those nerve endings are kind of just reaching out into the tissue in which they are going to, probably in the skin here, because it looks like they're sensing cold. Look at that arrow. It's not even an arrow. They're sensing temperature. So, of course, we've talked about dendrites before and what their function is. They're going to generate graded potentials, and then the cell body is going to decide whether to generate an action potential to the central nervous system, which results in sensation. Here's another type. So instead of the free nerve endings, we have an encapsulated nerve ending, and these are mostly used in touch, so pressure and vibration. So this is a kind of connective tissue covering here, encapsulating that nerve ending for that specialized function. And here we have another one. So this is a specialized cell called a gustatory taste receptor, and it is used to secrete biochemicals, which are then picked up by the specialized dendrite used in taste to generate graded potentials. We also have these in the eye, and same sort of system for hearing, and we'll see those more in the next chapter, in chapter 17. I'm going to skip that anatomy overview. You can skip it too. It's the basics, and we've been talking about the nervous system for a while now. Okay, so receptors may also be grouped based on location of the receptors and the origin of the stimuli that activate them. So exteroreceptors are going to be more associated with the external environment. So when we're hearing things, we're hearing mostly things outside of the body, vision, okay, our external environment, smell, taste, touch, or pressure, vibration, and pain. We also have interoreceptors. So interoreceptors are going to monitor the body's environment. Think like baroreceptors, which monitor blood pressure. We also have proprioceptors, and they allow us to perceive, or I should say, sense information about where we are in space. So if you've ever heard of like hand-eye coordination, that's related to proprioceptors, and they are also safety mechanisms that keep us from stretching too far or from exerting too much force. Okay, so we have our classification of sensory receptors here. We talked about free nerve endings, encapsulated nerve endings, and separate cells. We talked about exteroreceptors, interoreceptors, and proprioreceptors. But I think this part is new. So we have mechanoreceptors, detect mechanical stimuli, so touch, pressure, vibration. Thermoreceptors are going to detect changes in temperature. Nociceptors respond to painful stimuli resulting from physical or chemical damage to tissue. Photoreceptors detect light. Chemoreceptors and osmoreceptors both detect chemicals in the mouth, nose, or body fluids. Okay, up next, somatic sensations. Somatic sensations, we talked about tactile, thermal, pain, and proprioceptive. Tactile sensations, touch, pressure, vibration, itch, and tickle. I brought up this interaction here, so let me switch over. You have this picture in your book, but it's a little bit bigger here, so I wanted to take a look at this. One type of sensory receptor that we're going to have in the skin is a free nerve ending. And here's an example here. Whoops, click on this one, free nerve ending. So we can see the dendrites are reaching out and touching the epidermis. And we're going to have this type of receptor, this type of neuron, to sense both pain and temperature. Another type that we're going to see is a touch receptor, which wraps around the hair root plexus. So when the hair is moving on the skin, we can perceive that. So maybe think like in the wind, sometimes you can feel the hair on your arm moving, or maybe a light touch would stimulate this type of neuron, the hair root plexus neuron. We have Merkel discs. Merkel discs detect fine touch. We have the Meissner corpuscle, which detects just touch, and the Ruffini corpuscle, which detects stretching, and we typically only find this in the limbs. Oh, and one more, Pacinian detects, that's a deeper one, detects pressure and vibration. Okay, I'll go back over to the PowerPoint now. We have the sensation of pain. So there are two types of pain sensations, fast and slow. So fast would be acute, sharp, or pricking pain, and we perceive it faster. So it's perceived within 1 second. We also have slow pain, which is more like chronic pain, burning. We are slower to detect extreme temperature. Have you ever felt water and you're not sure if it's cold or hot? Like either it's so hot it feels cold, or it's so cold it kind of feels hot. Sometimes those signals get mixed up. I've kind of felt that before. So chronic burning, aching, or throbbing pain is perceived a second or more after the stimulus. Um, so not as fast as the fast pain. Superficial somatic pain arises from skin receptors. We just saw some of those skin receptors. Deep somatic pain is in the skeletal muscle, joints, tendons, and fascia, and is usually associated with movement and slow pain. Visceral pain, stimulation of pain sensors in the visceral organs. And sometimes when we have visceral pain, it presents as a more superficial pain. So it can present in or just deep to the skin that overlies the stimulated organ. And sometimes it's not directly over that organ. And that's what we call referred pain. Sometimes the pain shows up in another area that isn't just next to that organ. And a good example of that most of us are familiar with is the signs and symptoms of a heart attack. You can see that heart pain in the red goes all the way down the left arm, all the way down to the pinky. So if we had pain in the left arm, that's our referred pain that can be signaling us to a problem with the heart. And of course, I won't read all of these to you, but you can see the various examples there of referred pain. We've talked about what proprioception is. Proprioception is recognizing the position of body parts, so kind of knowing where we are in space. It's the reason why you can close your eyes and touch your nose. And that's thanks to proprioceptors, which are specialized nerves that detect this information. Muscle spindles, if you're in lab with me, we talked about muscle spindles last week. Muscle spindles are a type of proprioceptor. They look like a coil, and they are embedded in skeletal muscles, and they detect stretch. Tendon organs, usually called or also called Golgi tendon organs, are a type of proprioceptor found at the junction of a tendon and a muscle. And this says damage due to overstretching. I would slightly disagree with that. Muscle spindles are mostly what we use to prevent overstretching. Tendon organs also help us to limit the amount of force that we're exerting on a muscle. Joint kinesthetic receptors exist in and around the joint capsule of synovial joints, and they respond to any type of change that the joint is experiencing. So it helps to kind of coordinate all of the tissues around the joint to keep them safe and prevent excessive strain. So here we see an example. In the blue, we see the muscle spindles wrapping around those muscle fibers. And in the yellow, we see, I guess this is a gold color, isn't it? Tendon organ. This would be a true tendon organ. This would be, the yellow would be another similar type of sensory nerve. Okay, tactile receptors. I think that we can skip through here. I don't remember if we talked about adaptation rate. Did I skip over that? Adaptation means that you almost acclimate to a sensation. So for example, if I, reach out and I put my hand on top of my wrist, I'm perceiving this, I'm feeling this. I can feel that my hand is warm, and I can feel the pressure of my hand resting on top of my wrist. But if I leave it in this position for quite a while, I'm going to stop being as aware of this sensation. The feeling is going to kind of wear off. And that's adaptation. So it means that these nerves are going to stop firing, even though the stimulus is the same. My hand is still here. The nerves are going to stop sending messages to the central nervous system, and I'm going to stop perceiving this, at least as much after a short time. So that's what the adaptation rate is. So the corpuscle of touch, or the Meissner corpuscle, they have a rapid adaptation rate, which means after that onset of touch, they are not going to keep firing over time. Now, a different one, type 2 cutaneous mechanoreceptors, which are tactile discs, they have a slow adaptation rate. So they will keep firing as long as that stimulus is still there. Okay. I'm going to skip forward here. Now, this is the section that we're mostly going to skip. Okay? You do not have to memorize the somatic sensory pathways or the motor sensory pathways. So I'm going to, I just want to show you one thing in here. So somatic sensory pathways, of course, carry information from those sensory receptors to the central nervous system. I think you guys know that. There are a number of pathways, but I'm not asking you to memorize them. I just really like these pictures here. So this is showing us in the cerebral hemisphere how much real estate is given to these sensory areas. And I just think it's kind of a funny picture, so I wanted to point it out. The majority of the real estate is to the hand. So we can get a tremendous amount of information from the hand. And another big one is the lips. So we have a lot of sensory nerve endings in the lips and a lot of sensory nerve endings in the hand that send a lot of information to the central nervous system. I just think that's kind of a funny picture. And then there's another one as I scroll down here. So then we have the somatic motor pathways, same thing. I'm not asking you guys to memorize these pathways, but when we get to the cerebral, this is just showing one half of a cerebral hemisphere. Same thing. So somatic motor pathways, the hand has the largest amount of real estate. So we have a lot of nerves and a lot of brain space dedicated to what we can do with our hands, which I find interesting. Other than that, I'm not asking you guys to memorize all of these pathways. So I'm going to pause here. This video is too long, and I'll come back with the last section of this chapter with the integrative functions, right? Integrative functions of the cerebrum. Be right back.